Ever stumble upon something like totally ordinary at first glance, but then it turns out to be like this treasure chest of stories? That's kind of what today's deep dive is all about.
We're talking about diving headfirst into the heart of London,
But here's the twist.
guided by, well, a pretty unique source, actually. A recording from a real London bus tour.
Buckle up, listener, because we've got the transcript, and trust me, this isn't your grandma's sightseeing trip. It's packed with those, like, quirky historical tidbits and those local legends that make London so fascinating.
Yeah, these kind of sources are great because it's like history, but make it entertaining, It's like eavesdropping on someone's travel adventures while at the same time you're uncovering these layers of a city's past.
Okay, so picture this. You find this old cassette tape, right?
Dusty.
Totally. And it's labeled, like, London Adventures or something.
Mhm.
So you pop it in, and suddenly,
You're basically right there, rumble of the bus, Big Ben chiming in the distance. You can even hear the other passengers chatting away, excited to see the sights.
and then this, like, super enthusiastic tour guide cuts in welcoming everyone aboard. And that's where our deep dive begins.
The guide actually calls it the Toot Bus London Tour, which I kind of love.
Toot bus.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm already hooked. So where do they take us first?
They kick things off at, you guessed it, Piccadilly Circus.
Piccadilly Circus, that iconic spot in London.
And this is where it gets interesting.
Oh.
The guide's like, by the way, Piccadilly Circus, not about circuses at all.
Wait, seriously? No clowns?
Mm-hmm.
No, like, elephants balancing on those giant balls? I'm crushed. Okay, so where does the name come from then?
From fashion, can you believe it?
Fashion. Tell me more.
Apparently Piccadilly, it was this type of stiff, frilly collar, super popular back in the 17th century.
Okay.
And Piccadilly Circus just happened to be the place to find the most fashionable Piccadilles in town.
Fashion forward and, wow, that's a mouthful to say. Those 17th century Londoners were something else.
And like fashion, places change too today.
Hmm.
Piccadilly Circus is known for those flashing advertisements, the crowds, the energy, and of course.
That famous statue. The one everyone thinks is Eros, the god of love.
Yeah, that one. Except our guide drops this little truth bomb. It's actually Anteros,
Anteros.
the god of unrequited love, which kind of adds this whole bittersweet vibe to the place.
Like a little reminder that even in the heart of London, love doesn't always conquer all. Huh? So where does our toot bus head to next?
Well, before they leave Piccadilly Circus, the guide throws in this very classic London experience.
Let me guess, rain.
Close. Traffic jams. Apparently, standing in Piccadilly Circus long enough meant you'd see the whole world go by.
Some things never change. Okay, so our next stop then.
The guide describes it as having more stories than your Nan's cat has tails.
Coventry Street.
Built in the 1680s, and get this, named after Henry Coventry. Okay, but what kind of stories are we talking about here? Spill the tea.
Well, let's just say early days. Coventry Street. Total haven for gamblers, scoundrels. Maybe even a highwayman or two lurking about.
Okay, it's giving me some serious Peaky Blinders vibes here. Right. And then there were the theaters like, this was the spot for, let's just say, risque entertainment back in the 1800s.
I bet their shows were the hottest ticket in town back then.
Oh, totally. The guide even calls out the Prince of Wales Theatre, known for its, and I quote, cheeky and perhaps a tad risque musical comedies.
Cheeky and a tad risque. Gotta love those Victorians.
Mm.
Any other notable spots on Coventry Street?
Oh, yeah. There's this place called the Trocadero these days. It's an arcade and shopping center. But back then, get this, Grand Wine Storehouse.
Okay, now that's my kind of historical landmark. A grand wine storehouse, theaters. Those Victorians knew how to have a good time.
They did, but the guide doesn't shy away from the, tougher times either. Like during World War II, Coventry Street took a pretty bad hit from those Luftwaffe bombing raids.
A stark reminder that even amidst the bright lights and the good times, history always finds a way to leave its mark.
Absolutely. But just like Londoners always do, Coventry Street bounced back. In fact, the guide even points out a more modern connection, the London Pavilion Cinema.
What's so special about that?
That's where the Beatles premiered their films.
Wow, imagine being a fly on the wall for that.
Yeah.
Okay, it sounds like our virtual toot bus is slowing down for a moment.
Yeah, slight delay, it seems, on Coventry Street.
What's a holdup?
Looks like a few passengers are running a tad behind schedule.
Fashionably late for a history tour. Well, I hope they brought their walking shoes and a thirst for knowledge.
While we wait, though, the guide's got us covered. Did you know, for example, that London pigeons, they're practically royalty? Just without the crowns or the manners, for that matter?
Or the palaces.
Right, exactly.
Considering some of the monarchs we've learned about. maybe that's for the best.
Yeah, you might be right about that. Anyway, the guide wraps up the Coventry Street bit by highlighting its resilience, survived fires, wars, and, well, I'll just quote this directly, countless pigeon droppings.
A true testament to the spirit of London, if I've ever heard one.
Oh.
Now, as much as I love pigeons and their contributions to history,
Right.
where to next?
Looks like our toot bus is ready to roll on, and the guide's giving us a little sneak peek of what's to come. We've got Trafalgar Square, Whitehall, Westminster, South Bank, Waterloo Bridge.
Hit me with the grand finale.
Oh, it's good. The Tower of London, Buckingham Palace, and Tower Bridge. Just wait, you're gonna love it.
The anticipation is killing me. But first things first,
Right.
Trafalgar Square. What makes this place so special?
Well, for starters, it's named after a naval battle, not a dance craze. The guide's very clear on that
I was
point.
going to say, okay, so naval battle. Refresh my memory.
The Battle of Trafalgar. Huge British victory back in 1805. And right there at the heart of Trafalgar Square.
That would be.
Nelson's column, of course.
Ah, yes. The towering 52-meter column with Lord Nelson himself perched right on top, surveying his city. I can only imagine the view from up there. Okay, but tell me about those lions, though. You know, those four majestic beasts guarding the column.
Oh, those lions.
What's their story?
Well, legend has it that the sculptor, Sir Edwin Landseer, he actually used his own dog as a model for their paws.
His dog. No way. That's incredible. Talk about possum inspiration. Okay, but it makes sense they look so approachable, like they just want a belly rub.
And as if those lions weren't enough, those grand fountains in Trafalgar Square,
Don't even get me started on those fountains. So beautiful.
well, they weren't just for show.
Oh. What else were they for then?
Let's just say the Victorians, clever as they were, saw them as a way to, how do I put this delicately, discourage large gatherings.
Discourage, you mean?
The logic, as far as I can tell, was, well, people can't exactly stage a protest, let alone a riot, when they're, standing in a foot of water.
Brilliant. Outsmarted by Victorian fountains. Well played, Victorians. Well played.
It seems our bus is on the move again.
Where to next?
Looks like we're turning onto Whitehall now. This street is absolutely steeped in political history. Get ready for some intrigue.
Ooh, Whitehall. Intrigue, you say. I'm here for it. Let's just hope it's more The Crown and less, well, House of Cards.
Well, funny you should say that, because the first thing our guide points out, a statue.
The statue of...
King Charles I on horseback. And wouldn't you know it, they've placed him right at the entrance to Whitehall.
King Charles left. Didn't he have a bit of a disagreement with Parliament?
Disagreement might be putting it mildly. Let's just say his reign was, well, marked by clashes with Parliament over money and power, which, spoiler alert,
Led to the English Civil War.
exactly.
And, spoiler alert part 2, it didn't end well for him.
Not well at all. The guide actually mentions that Charles I was, well, beheaded back in 1649. And get this, just a stone's throw from where that statue now
Let's
stands.
talk about awkward family reunions. You'd think they'd have maybe put the statue somewhere, a tad less symbolic.
Well, get this. After Charles I, Parliament ordered the statue to be destroyed, melted down, gone, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, no.
Oh, but that's not what happened.
What happened?
Instead of destroying it, the metal worker who was supposed to do the deed, he hid the statue.
He hid it. Why?
Preserved it in secret until, the monarchy was restored.
Mhm.
Talk about a power move.
That is amazing. That metal worker deserves a raise or at least a commemorative plaque or something. It's incredible how even statues have these whole hidden histories.
Speaking of history, we're continuing down Whitehall, past Downing Street, home of the Prime Minister.
Number 10 Downing Street. It always looks so imposing in photos, but I bet in person.
It's actually surprisingly quaint, according to our guide, at least in terms of size, but you can just feel the weight of history there,
Oh, absolutely. Think of the decisions made, the historical figures who've walked those halls. I would love to just peek inside one of those cabinet meetings.
Right. Imagine the stories those walls could tell.
So as we journey down Whitehall, what else are we seeing?
The guide points out memorials, statues. They're everywhere, each one marking a war, a leader, some big historical event. It really drives home the point that beneath all the pomp and ceremony, there's this whole tapestry of, well, triumphs and tragedies.
And then at the end of Whitehall, we reach...
The cenotaph.
Right. The cenotaph.
Mm.
Sobering. That tribute to those lost in World War I and, well, all conflicts since.
A powerful reminder of the true cost of conflict.
Indeed. From those grand royal residences to the heart of British governance, Whitehall is like this poignant microcosm of British history, so much packed into a single street.
And our deep dive, well, it's just getting started. Next up, we're heading across Westminster Bridge. Stunning views of the House of Parliament, Big Ben, the whole shebang. And as our trusty toot bus rumbles across Westminster Bridge, even through this, old recording, you can practically hear those tourists gasping.
Right, because those Houses of Parliament are just iconic.
Totally.
And then there's that clock tower,
Right.
Big Ben. Although, I swear I heard somewhere that calling it Big Ben is actually like a faux pas.
Oh, yeah.
Our tour guide would definitely want to set us straight on that one. So Big Ben, it's the nickname for the Great Bell
The bell.
inside the tower, not the tower itself. See, this is why I love these deep dives. Never stop learning. Okay, so we've got palaces, Parliament.
Yeah.
What other London goodies are in store for us?
From here, the tour takes us across the Thames to the South Bank.
Ah, the South Bank.
Now, these days, it's known for all things arts and culture.
Totally. Like if you want theater, art, good vibes, you head straight to the South Bank.
Right. But back in medieval times, our guide actually paints a very different picture.
Oh, spill it.
Apparently, it was considered pretty darn swampy. Not exactly a desirable address.
Well, everyone loves a good transformation story.
Right.
So what happened?
The guide points to one major turning point, the Festival of Britain,
When was that?
1951.
Okay.
Huge exhibition right there on the South Bank.
Yeah.
Celebrating British arts, culture, science, the whole shebang. It was a smash hit. Completely changed how people saw the area.
It's crazy how one event can, breathe new life into a place,
Yeah.
Reminds me of those music festivals today. They bring people together, create these, lasting memories.
Yeah.
It stays with you.
Totally. And speaking of bringing things together, the tour takes us on this little detour
A detour. Where to?
down Lambeth Palace Road.
Lambeth Palace. That's, got something to do with the Church of England, right?
Ding, ding, ding. You got it. Official residence of the Archbishop of Canterbury and one of the oldest continuously used religious sites in, well, all of England.
Wow.
Just think about all the history those walls have seen.
I know, right? Archbishops, pacing around, pondering the big questions.
Yeah.
Maybe sneaking a biscuit or two when no one's looking. It's wild to me how a place like that has just endured for centuries.
Right. And get this, the guide, very eloquently, compares Lambeth Palace's architecture to, and I quote, the architectural version of a potluck dinner, which I find hilarious and weirdly accurate.
I love that. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, all cobbled together over time. It's like a physical timeline.
Right.
Speaking of, what era are we in for this next bit?
We're jumping back to the 17th century because the guide decides to tell us about this one archbishop, Archbishop Laud. Apparently had a knack for making enemies.
Uh-oh. This is not going to end well, is it?
Spoiler.
It did not.
Okay, let me guess. Wrong side of history, wrong side of a rather heated debate.
Let's just say his story didn't end with a peaceful retirement in the countryside.
Oh, no.
What happened?
Imprisoned in the Tower of London and, well, eventually executed.
Yikes.
Yeah, not great.
It's like a Game of Thrones, but in, fancy robes and with more theological debates.
Right.
Okay, so after that rather grim detour into religious power struggles, where does our virtual tour bus go next?
Well, on a later note, the guide does point out that Lambeth Palace has this impressive library, ancient manuscripts, historical documents, the works.
Oh, wow. Imagine the secrets hidden in those pages. I bet they could give today's bestsellers a run for their money.
Right. Okay, from Lambeth, we're back to a more bustling scene. York Road.
York Road, as in named after York.
You got it, that ancient city in the north.
Ah, yes. Famous for its history, its charm, and of course, its pudding.
Of course. Though no pudding on this part of the tour, sadly.
Okay, fine. Back to the history then. What's on York Road?
Well, the guide, very excitedly, points out something that you really can't miss the London Eye.
Oh, that giant Ferris wheel. I've seen pictures. I'd be terrified to go on it, but it's definitely a sight to behold.
Totally. And as we're cruising along York Road, we pass another London classic, the Old Vic Theatre.
Ooh, the Old Vic. Now, that is a name I know. It's famous for its, Shakespeare.
Right. Among other things, one of the oldest, most celebrated theaters in London, seen its fair share of legendary actors, playwrights, the whole lot. The guide even hints at all the backstage drama. Apparently there are whispers of,
Ghostly actors.
Exactly. Still haunting the wings.
Ooh, spooky. I love it. It's incredible how some places just hold on to stories, across centuries, across generations.
Right. Okay, so after our brief encounter with theatrical history and maybe a ghost or two, we find ourselves at...
Let me guess. Another pub.
Not quite.
Oh.
This one's for the film buffs. The BFI IMAX at Waterloo.
The IMAX. No, that is a cinema.
Right. Our guide calls it, and I quote, the Godzilla of screens, which...
Yeah. Accurate.
Right. And for good reason. Largest cinema screen in Britain, 20 meters high. Apparently that's circular design, not just for looks. It makes sure that wherever you sit...
You've got a great view.
Exactly. And of course, no trip to the BFI IMAX would be complete without the possibility of spotting a celebrity or two.
Right. Keep your eyes peeled, listeners.
Yeah.
Okay, so after that cinematic interlude, where to next?
We're gliding past another landmark, this one a bit more, shall we say, stately.
Hit me with it.
Somerset House.
Somerset House. That's the one with that gorgeous courtyard, right? I've always wanted to go ice skating there in the winter. They do that whole thing, right?
They do, but get this, long before it was an art center and ice skating rink, the site was home to.
What? Don't tell me they had ice skating back in, like, medieval times.
Not quite,
Yeah.
but close. A Tudor palace.
The Tudor Palace,
Right.
as in...
As in, it's the very place Queen Elizabeth I was born.
Shut. The Bloss door. Front door. No way. Talk about a historical glow-up.
Yeah.
From royal birthplace to ice skating rink.
You gotta love it. And there's more.
More.
Somerset House also has its own resident ghost, apparently.
Every place has a ghost story in London, doesn't it? Who is this one? Anne Boleyn's stylist come back to haunt the fashion world.
Not quite. This one's known as Renaissance Ron.
Renaissance Ron. Okay, tell me everything.
He's supposedly a spectral art critic.
A ghost who judges art.
Mm,
That's amazing. I wonder what you think of, like, modern art installations.
right.
Maybe we should leave him the sketchbook next time we're there. Okay, so after our ghostly encounter at Somerset House, where does the tour go?
We're back to a bustling London street, the Strand. And get this.
Yes.
It was once the place to be seen if you were anyone in London society.
Really? The Strand?
Yeah.
I mean, I've walked down that street. It's cool and all, but I didn't realize it was the place back in the day.
Oh, yeah. For centuries, it was the spot for those fancy Londoners to strut their stuff. Grand mansions, palaces, you name it.
And of course, we can't forget Drury Lane.
Ah, yes, Drury Lane. Synonymous with London theatre, wouldn't you say? And our guide very dramatically points out the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, one of the oldest theatres in London. And, as legend has it...
The most haunted? I knew it. Okay, but what are the stories? Give me all the spooky details.
It's been rebuilt a few times, you know. Fires, renovations, the usual. So naturally...
Plenty of ghost stories, right?
Exactly. The most famous one. The Man in Grey.
Man in Gray. Classic. Does he have, like, good seats? Front row, maybe? Or maybe he wanders around offering notes on the performances.
You never know. Maybe he's got strong opinions about Shakespearean interpretations.
Right. Hamlet just wasn't the same after they switched that one line.
Exactly.
Okay, I'll get sidetracked here. So we've got our spooky theater. Any other notable stops on the Strand?
We actually passed by two very famous churches, St. Mary Le Strand and St. Clement Danes.
Ugh. Those are the ones from that nursery rhyme.
Oranges and lemons.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I haven't thought about that rhyme in years. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of. What was it?
St. Clement Danes.
Right. See, listener, history's everywhere in London, even in the nursery rhymes we learn as kids.
So, from spooky theaters and rhyming churches, our tour takes, well, an interesting turn.
Ooh, lay it on me.
We're venturing off the beaten path a bit to a place called Bush House.
Bush House. Okay, I feel like I should know this one. Was it, like, someone famous's house?
Not famous in the, like, celebrity sense,
Yeah.
but let's just say its impact is huge GE. Our guide actually calls it the Hogwarts for radio wizards.
Hogwarts for radio wizards. Okay, now you have to tell me more.
For decades, Bush House was the headquarters of the BBC World Service.
A BBC World Service, of course.
Yeah.
Now it makes sense. Gosh, that building must have seen it all.
Great. From those studios, voices traveled across continents, broadcasting news, information.
Yeah.
During wartime, peacetime. It was a lifeline for so many.
And to think, it all happened right here in London in this one building. It just blows my mind how many stories are hidden in plain sight.
Right. And the guide actually throws in this kind of cheeky detail. Apparently there's this sealed room in Bush House.
A sealed room. Ooh, mysterious. What's in it?
Two, shall we say, very detailed statues. Caused quite a stir back in the day, according to our guide.
Okay, I wasn't expecting that. Scandalous statues at the BBC. I guess even they like to keep things lively. All right, so After that unexpected detour into broadcasting and, well, anatomy, where to next?
Our tour is taking us somewhere majestic now, the Royal Courts of Justice.
Ooh, the Royal Courts of Justice. Okay, now, that is a building. Those Gothic arches, those spires. It's straight out of a movie set.
Right. Our guide says it was designed to inspire awe, convey that sense of tradition, and it definitely does that. It dates back to the 1870s, and, well, just imagine all those legal battles, all those stories.
Right. I can practically hear the barristers now making their cases in those, like, booming voices, those wigs, the gowns. It's got to be quite a sight.
Oh, and speaking of the wigs, our guide says this is prime spotting ground for those iconic white wigs those British lawyers are famous for.
Of course. You can't forget the wigs. I bet those things have seen more drama than an episode of, well, you know. Okay, but tell me, any ghost stories associated with the royal courts?
You know, the guide doesn't mention any specific stories.
Really?
But he does say, with all that history, the nature of the cases, the drama, it'd be more surprising if there weren't a few restless spirits roaming around.
Fair point. Okay, so after our brush with the law, where does our trusty toot bus take us next?
We're going back in time to a street practically synonymous with newspapers. Fleet Street.
Fleet Street. Yeah, I've heard of it, of course. But give me the historical rundown. Why is Fleet Street the place for newspapers?
Well, it all started way back in the year 1500,
Okay.
when this guy, William Caxton, set up shop on Fleet Street.
William Caxton. Wait a minute. Wasn't he the guy who brought the printing press to England?
That's the one, and he set up right on Fleet Street.
Talk about a game changer. I mean, the printing press, that changed everything. Communication, information, the spread of ideas.
Absolutely. And for centuries after that, Fleet Street was the place to be if you were in the news business.
Like the social media of its day, basically. So all the big names were there.
Oh, yeah, the guide mentions the Times, the Daily Mail, the whole lot. They all had offices there.
I can only imagine what it was like back then, the clatter of typewriters, those giant printing presses churning out the news. And you know what that means.
What's that?
Where there are journalists, there are always pubs.
Ah, yes, of course. The watering hole. And the guide does not disappoint, let me tell you. He paints quite the picture of those Fleet Street pubs journalists letting off steam after a long day of chasing headlines.
Oh, I bet those pub walls could tell some stories. Okay, but before we leave Fleet Street behind, we have to address the, well, elephant in the room. Or maybe it's more like a demon barber in the alleyway.
Ah, yes, you can't talk about Fleet Street without mentioning Sweeney Todd.
Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street. He's the stuff of nightmares.
Hmm.
But he wasn't real, though, right? He was just a character, right?
He was, but the story, I mean, the idea of this barber murdering his customers, it's so creepy, so macabre. It's like it's woven into the very fabric of the place.
It's true what they say sometimes, that the line between fact and fiction gets a little blurry,
Yeah.
especially in a city as old as London. Okay, on that slightly creepy note, let's move on, shall we? Where does our tour guide take us next?
Next up, a place of, well, towering grandeur, Ludgate Hill, home to the one and only St. Paul's Cathedral.
St. Paul's Cathedral. That dome is iconic. Every time I see a photo, I'm just awestruck. It's breathtaking.
It really is. And our guide, Ever the History Buff, tells us that the current St. Paul's, it's actually the fifth cathedral to stand on that very spot.
The fifth. What happened to the other four?
Well, let's just say they met a few unfortunate ends. Fires, you know, that kind of thing.
Wow. Talk about resilience. To rebuild not once, not twice, but 5 times on the same spot. That's dedication.
Right. And get this, the current one, the one designed by Sir Christopher Wren. It was built after the Great Fire of London back in 1666.
Like a phoenix rising from the ashes. What an image. Okay, St. Paul's is going straight to the top of my London bucket list.
Yeah.
I'm serious. I've got to see that dome in person. Any must-sees inside, according to our guide.
Oh, you can't miss the Whispering Gallery.
The Whispering Gallery. Why? What is it?
It's this, like, architectural quirk. You whisper on one side.
Yeah.
And someone on the other side can hear you perfectly.
No way. That's amazing. The things you learn on these bus tours, I bet those walls have heard some juicy gossip over the years.
Yeah.
Okay, so after St. Paul's, where does our virtual adventure take us?
We're continuing on to Cannon Street.
Cannon Street. Was it, like, named after cannons?
You'd think so, right? But according to our guide, it's actually a corruption of Candlewick Street.
Candlewick Street. So less about warfare, more about, like, illumination. I love it.
Exactly. Back in medieval times, this was the place to be for candle making.
From lighting up the city to, well, lighting up our minds with history. It's quite the journey, isn't it? Okay, so what else is happening on Candlewick Street? or Cannon Street, as it's known these days.
As we're passing by, the guide points out the Mansion House,
The Mansion House, as in,
official residence of the Lord Mayor of London.
of course, another grand building, another fascinating history, I'm sure.
Oh, and we can't forget about the London Stone.
The London Stone. Now, that is something I've always wanted to know more about. What is it?
It's this, like, mysterious block of stone housed on Cannon Street. Nobody really knows its origins, which I think is kind of cool.
A real-life mystery
Right.
right there in the heart of London.
Right. Some people think it was a Roman milestone, like, used for measuring distances.
Okay.
Others say it was part of a monument, maybe even an ancient pagan artifact.
You know, for a city that's so well documented, it's amazing how something so old can still hold on to its secrets. Speaking of mysteries, our tour is almost over. Where does it all end?
Our toot bus pulls up to its final stop, a fitting end to our London adventure, I'd say.
Don't keep me in suspense. Where?
The Tower of London?
The Tower of London. It just wouldn't be a London tour without it, would it? Kings, queens, prisoners, executions, ravens, maybe even a ghost or two lurking about.
And of course, the crown jewels.
The crown jewels,
Right.
guarded by those beefeaters in their fancy outfits. It's like stepping back in time.
And speaking of stepping back in time, our guide reminds us that over the centuries, the Tower of London, it's been a royal palace, a fortress, a prison, a treasury. And get this.
But don't tell me it's been a karaoke bar this whole time.
Not quite, but it was a zoo at one point.
A zoo
Yeah.
in the Tower of London. Are we talking like lions and tigers and bears?
Well, one bear, at least. Apparently, back in the 13th century, King Henry III got a rather interesting gift from the King of Norway. A polar bear.
You got a polar bear.
As a gift.
I mean, I love a good houseplant as much as anyone, but a polar bear, that's an interesting choice, to say the least. What did he do with it?
Well, according to our guide, they kept the bear in the tower. Even let it go fishing for its meals in the Thames.
Wait, a polar bear fishing in the Thames. That's an image.
Ah.
You know, for a place so steep in history, London never ceases to surprise.
Right. And with that image, our virtual tour comes to an end.
Oh, that went by so fast.
Hmm.
But what a journey. From those fashion-forward streets of Piccadilly Circus to the whispers of history on Fleet Street, those stunning churches, the grandeur of St. Paul's, and, of course, that polar bear fishing in the Thames. I mean, come on, we've covered it all.
We really have. And it just goes to show history is everywhere, even in the most unexpected places.
So the next time you find yourself in London, or even just daydreaming about it, remember, keep your eyes open, your ears tuned, and your imagination fired up, because you never know what you might discover. Until next time, keep exploring.